just like the act of discovering that with a director, and is very exciting, and that, you know, happens in pre-production and watching films with them or looking at art together, and just getting, you know, because pre-production is like the sky's the limit, and it's calmer than production. It can like be crazy too, but just, you know, when we can like go in and lock ourselves in a room and just have those creative discussions and daydream, and but that's just the best. And then of course being on set and you know, executing that is fun.
Do you have any aspirations to ever direct?
It's definitely not the end goal, but let's say if the opportunity presents itself later down the line, then I might explore it. But I'm just so obsessed with cinematography and being a visual storyteller right now that's it, you know.
Well, you're doing an amazing job.
Thanks.
And that brings us to Blackbird.
Okay.
Because it was very beautiful. I loved how moody it was and how subtle the filmmaking was, but there was some really, really nice camera movement. And just to kind of do a little synopsis, just so if anyone hasn't seen it, it is all about Jimmy Keene, that's right. He was pushing drugs, ended up getting caught, was 25 to life for it, right?
I think he got, was it 10 years initially.
Maybe. Oh, okay. Yeah. I thought it was a lot longer. Okay, so 10 years. And while he was incarcerated, he was approached by the FBI to speak with the killer at the time, Larry Hall, to get a confession. Very intense story.
Based on a true story.
Based on a true story.
Which is insane, yeah.
And where did that take place?
And so Jimmy Keene was living in Illinois, and then he transferred to Springfield Prison for the criminally insane, where Larry Hall was in Springfield, Missouri.
Wow. Were you aware of this story before it came to you?
No. It was pretty low profile. I mean, there's this like documentary online that I watched when I heard about it, but yeah, it wasn't like really talked about that much.
So talk about the early stages of this project when you were approached. What was the first thing that stood out to you? And at this time was creator, what's his name?
Dennis Lehane.
Yeah, was he involved in the project?
Oh, yeah. It was his baby. So it sort of came out of the blue for me. I was kind of going on some interviews of different films and lost out on consecutive ones, and so nothing was kind of happening, and then all of a sudden this kind of fell into my lap, and I had, you know, was sent the scripts and read all 6, and I'm like, oh my God, this material is fantastic. It's right up my alley. It's dark, it's gritty. These characters are incredible, and the writing, it's Dennis Lehane, you know, and I was like, it's never going to happen, but you know, they want to interview me, so we'll see. And I interviewed with Mikkel Roscom, the director of episodes 1 through 3, and we hit it off immediately. And he liked me, and so he went to bat for me and told Dennis and the other producers, I really think she's the one. And so I met with Dennis and the other producers, and that went well. And an hour after that meeting, my agent gets a phone call saying that they're going into Apple as a unified front and gonna, you know, pitch for me to shoot it, or just tell them that they want me to shoot it. And so I was like, oh my God, this is insane, because I just, you know, really didn't think I had a shot, because, you know, like I said, I just really had done independent films leading up to this and some bigger commercials, but like I'd never done a TV series before, and they wanted someone to shoot the whole thing. It's not like I was coming after another DP who, you know, established the look, and we were going to alternate or anything like that. So it was a big opportunity, and they had to put a lot of trust into me, and they did, and and it was an incredible experience, and I learned a ton.
I can imagine. And one of the questions that I have immediately is, being the series DP, there's no other DP, right? But you have different directors coming on and off. What is that like, not having it consistently from episode 1 to 6? Was it challenging, or was it a lot easier that you thought it would be? Was there a certain level of like prep that you had to do to make sure that each director knew how to stay consistent with what was done prior? I would love insight from that.
Yeah, it was challenging because obviously it was my first time doing that. But just, I leaned on my past experience of just being a DP and in general and having to adapt to various different directors on different projects. It's like, okay, yeah, I'm used to doing that, and I'm an adaptable person. And yeah, it was tough because there wasn't a lot of prep time in between the episodes. But the two directors who came in, Jim McKay and Joe Chappelle, were very much on board with, they had watched cuts of the previous episodes, and they were very much on board on what we were already doing and what we established, and they really liked the visual language. So luckily they weren't trying to come in and change everything. They really complimented it and respected it. So the transition was good, but it was just, I think the most challenging part was just each of them had a different way of working, a different process, especially in prep, and then just not having a lot of time with the last two directors to really get to know them and prep with them, before. So you just take what you can get, and you're already in it. By the time Jim came on, we had shot probably almost 50 days. So we were a machine at that point, and.
What did Principal look like? When did you guys start, and what was the overall amount of time spent shooting?
Let's see. We started prepping in March, started shooting at the end of April, and wrapped mid-October.
When was that? During the pandemic?
Yeah. So it was 2021 last year. And, so it was like a 95-day shoot. There was a hurricane in there. So we had I think it was 2 weeks off in September, Hurricane Ida. We all had to evacuate to Austin.
Wow.
It was actually a much needed break, and actually kind of served as a little prep time, and just everyone got to reset. I mean, because I was at we were in the last month of shooting, when we came back, I think we had 3 or 4 weeks left. So it just it helped carry us to the finish line, that little rest period of hurricane evacuation.
That's crazy.
Yeah,
was there
crazy.
any hurdles besides that with COVID, or was it pretty seamless once you guys got into the rhythm of it? What were some of the hardest parts of the production?
I think just shooting in a real jail. It wasn't operational. It closed down after Hurricane Katrina, but still a real jail location, and so that had its obvious restraints, and we had to come up with a lot of workarounds for lighting and just getting the camera, especially in the tiny spaces of their cells. That was challenging, and just being in a jail setting for that long kind of takes its toll on you.
I can imagine.
Emotionally, psychologically. And that was, that location is where we shot the most.
Right.
And that was pretty much all the second half of the shoot, the majority of it.
Did you spend any time in other prisons to be able to get the vibe, to make it as authentic as possible? What was the research that you had to do?
Yeah, good question. No, I did. So I only had 5 weeks of prep at the beginning to pretty much prep the whole show. So I didn't really have time to take field trips or anything like that. And I hadn't shot much in prisons before on any projects, maybe a scene here and there, maybe. But my research led me to Gordon Parks's photo essay that he did.
I love Gordon Parks.
I do too, but I didn't know about this particular essay in this collection called The Atmosphere of Crime.
I literally
You knew that
just bought that book.
Yeah.
Oh, no, I messaged you on Instagram about that. I don't know if you remember this. You might have never even seen it, but you were posting photos, and I went to Arcana Bookstore.
Yeah, that's where I got my copy. Yeah.
Monograph book is literally one of the best that I have ever seen.
Okay, I'm glad you know it.
It is so
Yeah.
good. It is so good.
Yeah.
I have a lot of different photography books. I picked that up probably January of this year, and I thumb through it all the time, and it's so vivid and so intense.
Yes.
And that is photography. Sorry, like you got me all excited.
I know.
But that
I'm
is
excited.
like
Yeah.
real journalistic photography.
Yes,
It is so
yes.
good.
So that was the visual thesis. So I was at Arcana Books, maybe like January 2021. So before I even knew what Blackbird was, and I was like getting, I spend way too much money there. So I already
I've spent
had
too
like
much
3 or
money.
4 books. And then as I'm checking out, I see that. I'm like, what, Gordon? I've never, I know his work, but I just didn't know that. So I pick it up and I'm like, God, this is amazing. I want this too, but like, I'll get it next time. And so Blackbird comes around doing the research, and then I remembered that. And I'm like, that's the ticket. And that just informed everything: color palette, lighting, lensing. It was a huge inspiration.
And just so everyone knows what it is again, it's Gordon Parks. What is the title?
The Atmosphere of Crime. It was a essay that he did in 1957 in various prisons. I think some were actually in Illinois. But just the way, there was this interesting pastel palette I thought was a great juxtaposition, right? And our themes in Blackbird is misogyny and toxic masculinity and, serial killers raping and murdering women. So I thought just that the pastel soft color palette was just contrasted those ideas in a very kind of visceral, unsettling way. So then I learned from looking at that book, because if you notice, a lot of the jails in that book were painted like light, like seafoam green, blush pink, light blue. And so apparently wardens started to paint the jails in pastel colors, specifically pink, because they thought it had a calming effect on the male prisoners. So I was really inspired by that, and I showed the production designer, Charisse, the book, and she responded to it as well. So we painted our Springfield prison pink and green. There's the way Gordon Parks, through all his work, but just in that book, just captures natural light and how it's natural and it's real, but it feels very shaped, and it feels, for lack of a better word, cinematic.
It's very cinematic.
It's just very striking. And it doesn't feel. I didn't want to light and shoot the prisons in a very on the nose kind of way, or very theatrical. And I wanted it to be real, but I didn't want it to be like documentary. It needed to have a mood. It needed to be moody, and it needed to be unnerving. And the light, I wanted to play with shadows and silhouettes, and so the light needed to be shaped a certain way. So I just felt like that essay just really did all of that, and it inspired me so much.
It's weird when looking at that book with how disturbing some of the imagery is. You don't want to look away, though. It's the way that he frames it, and the way where like he shrouds some of the more like violent photos, but it keeps you in the book from like the time you open it to the time you close, which there's some other photograph books where I only like a few photos, but every single one serves a purpose in that. So that's really incredible that you use that. And to speak a little bit more about aesthetic, let's talk about the tools that you used to shoot Blackbird. What was the camera, lenses, and how did you end up, and why did you end up with those tools?
Yeah. So I shot on the Alexa Mini LF with Panavision H series lenses. I thought I'd used the H series a bunch on commercials, so I was familiar with them. And I thought they would be the perfect fit because they kind of naturally have this pastelish quality to them. And they're soft, have rich skin tones. They were very much the Atmosphere of Crime lenses. And I tested a bunch of other Panavision lenses, and I knew the H's were going to be the winner, and they were. And so that's why I went with those. And
is there a reason why you went for large format?
Yeah, because Dennis wanted to create and maintain a very uncomfortable, unsettling tone because, of what's going on with these two prisoners who are just sitting across from one another for sometimes, 10 dialogue pages at a time and getting into some weird, uncomfortable conversations, and Jimmy Keen's just having to sit there and listen and pretend like he's interested and pretend like he likes this person. So it's very character driven. It's a very much us living inside their conversations and not being able to escape, because that's what the Jimmy Keen was going through. So with large format, I think that allowed me to create sort of like landscapes with the actors' faces. And I feel like it just helped us really transport the audience like inside their conversations and immerse them in that space. And it also helped with being in the small location, the small cells and the small jail spaces, by having a wider field of view. So
that's
those
awesome.
are the reasons, yeah.
And did you use any like specialty glass or anything to shoot in the tighter spaces?
Nope. No, the H series lenses are tiny.
Okay.
And yeah, so no specialty lenses.
And you said you've had a relationship with Panavision for quite some time. Is that your rental house to go to for everything?
Yeah.
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 Panavision's amazing.
Yeah.
They're right down the road from us.
Yeah,
We love
right. Yeah.
stopping by, so shout out to
Yeah.
Panavision.
Yeah.
Something I would love to talk about is rules of engagement. I don't know if you're a DP that likes to formulate like composition per character and try to stick to that throughout the whole series, or try to figure out why, the motivation for all of these shots. I know most DPs, they like do that, but going into a project, do you create any form of a Bible with the director? Is that something that you do?
Yes,
Yeah.
definitely. But it's a fine line of getting too rigid with rules. I think rules are great because they define your sandbox to play within. But sometimes it's okay to step out of that, and I think it's important to recognize those times where maybe you need to step out of your rules and break them, and I felt like early on maybe I was like I could be very rigid, and I learned from that of like, not having to always follow the rules, but maintaining consistency. But yeah, just knowing when to do something different. But yeah, I think I like, everything definitely has to have motivation. And there's always like a few focal lengths that I end up going back to for every project. There's like 2 or 3, and that's kind of like, like Blackbird is like 35, 40, 50. It's pretty much what we shot the whole series on.
One of my favorite shots that you pulled off was of Jimmy Keen when he's walking through the prison. It's like top down, I believe.
Oh, yeah.
Would talk about that shot, how you pulled that off, and just
Yeah.
like the lighting behind it, the motivation, because it stands out in the series as one of the really cool, just like camera movement that you do.
That shot we had, I think it was a Ronin on a dolly that was armed out over the balcony of the second floor of that cell block, and we were on track, and yeah, it was just 90 degrees tilted down, and just pushed the dolly until the end. It was following Larry Hall and the guard, escorting him back to his cell. And so it was just tracking above him, and then I think we turned 90 degrees, and the camera flipped as he enters his cell. So it was actually kind of simple. And then lighting, I think I just had just a select few of the overhead fluorescents on, and that's it.
Yeah, you were saying that it was rather hard to shoot in the prison. And what were some of the obstacles besides like space? How did you pull it off? Did you try to do like integrated lighting, use more practicals?
Yeah.
What were some of the tricks that you employed?
Yeah, so I knew I wanted to mix a lot of lighting, a lot of different color temperatures, and that was inspired by Atmosphere of Crime. So tungsten, daylight, fluorescent, and that felt very institutional and gritty, and I love how when colors just contaminate and meld into one another. So one of the hardest things to deal with in that prison was the existing overhead fluorescent fixtures. So we changed them out at the beginning, so they were all cool white, so they were consistent, regular fluorescent tubes. But we didn't have individual control. I mean, we're not on a stage, so I couldn't turn like these 5 off and keep these 2 on and slow these 2 down. There wasn't any dimming or any of that. So that was very hard. So the workaround was the grips building cutouts of black and diffusion and ND gels that were the exact size of those housings, and those were attached with industrial magnets. So every time, it still took time. Like every time we wanted to turn off, because the way the lights were circuited, we couldn't just, it was either all on or all off. So they would go around and black out, however many I wanted off, and or gelling, however many needed to be slowed down or whatever. So that was quite just a process to do every time, because those fluorescents really set the ambience in the space. And then, the rest of the lighting, like during the day, and we were on the 2nd floor, so we had to have condors, but we had M90s and Arri Maxes outside of the windows of the hero cells and some of the other cells next door. So they each had a strip of a window. It was like maybe this wide, a few inches wide by like 4 feet long. So we pushed HMIs through there, and then they each had a practical tungsten light in their cells. And then from there, I would just augment with sky panels or Titan tubes, a lot of negative fill.
Do you have any light fixtures that you always have on like every production? Do you have like a certain package that you always want to make sure?
Usually I'll have, with HMIs, it's like the Arri Maxes and the M series lights, and I use tubes quite a bit, like the Titan Astera tubes. Yeah. We use those little, I always forget the name of, like these little like puck-looking lights. There's a name for them, and I forget what company makes them.
Is it circular?
Maybe Aperture. It's kind of like a dome.
The Aperture, like MC lights, those ones?
I know what you're talking about. It's not those, but it's kind of the idea of that. What is it?
Pixel brick?
No, it was something along those lines. I always forget the name. But that was like a workhorse inside the cells, because it was, we'd put diffusion over it.
They're magnetic, I'm assuming, too?
They might, I think so. And then that was just very easy to like get a little eye light, or just even as a key light sometimes, like at night. That worked for that. Always like to, what else do I have? I use sky panels quite a bit. Light mats sometimes. I love tungsten as well. I like to always carry tungsten. Licos are great, both tungsten and Joe Licos. I love using those as well.
Yeah, so a little bit of everything.
Yeah.
Like to be prepared.
Yeah, maybe so. Yeah.
So for a series like this, this is arguably your biggest project yet, and it's only going to get bigger from here.